Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and welcome to this webinar in Deloitte's COVID-19 series. Today we want to spend some time focusing on how to keep your team and yourself connected and healthy while everyone is working remotely under current circumstances. Before we get into the content today, I would just like to introduce myself and the team who will be taking you through our discussion. My name is Ian Curtin. I'm a director in Deloitte's Human Capital Practice, where I lead our organization transformation practitioner team. So I specialize in working with organizations on change management, culture, large strategic transformation initiatives. Joining me on the panel today, we have Andrea Fouché, who is a senior manager in our human capital team, who also is part of our organization transformation practice. Andrea has extensive experience delivering change programs and helping clients work through business effectiveness challenges, really focusing on people and performance issues. And Andrea is also a specialist in our team in the future of work and the implications of that for organizations, individuals, and broader communities. Our second panelist then is mobilise, and she's a senior consultant in our human capital team. She is an organizational psychologist by background, and she specializes in employee experience and engagement. And as part of our team at Deloitte, she focuses on working with clients on strategic talent and building solutions across different industries. So in the webinar today, we're going to cover four main topics. We're going to share with you some insights around the key challenges that our clients are facing as they grapple with remote working, transitioning to it and making it work for them. Andrea will be sharing some key insights on how to mobilize your team and how to stay connected while we work under the current circumstances. Elsie will then provide some key tips on physical and psychological well-being and how you can ensure that your teams remain motivated and productive under what can often be trying circumstances. And finally, we want to open up the discussion to address any kind of questions that you may have. We will have a Q&A session at the end. You can see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will pick those up and respond to them in a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So we want today to be really interactive. We've also built a number of polls into the presentation, and I'd really invite you to respond to those, share your thoughts, and help us to understand what key challenges you're facing at this time. So to move into our first section, there's absolutely no doubt that COVID-19 has had a really, really significant impact on daily life as we know it, and within the space of just a couple of weeks, our normal routines have shifted really significantly. You can see on the slide that there are very, very few countries left unaffected by COVID-19. The number of cases worldwide has now exceeded 1 million. Unfortunately, Ireland has been very heavily impacted since the first confirmed case of the virus on the 29th of February. And since the 12th of March, the Irish government has been implementing a range of measures to try and slow and stop the spread of the virus and lessen its impact on our population, our society, and our economy. So employees have been encouraged to work from home. As we know, schools, colleges, and childcare facilities are closed. Bars, restaurants, non-essential shops were closed shortly after that. And a real indicator of how serious the situation was and how seriously it was being treated by the government was the cancellation of the St. Patrick's Festival. On March 17th, Dublin City resembled a ghost town rather than the thriving centre of an international hub of celebrations, which it normally is. So since then, the government has made 2 additional announcements with additional restrictions to increase social distancing, and as we know, those are going to be in place until at least this weekend, and we expect to hear tomorrow or Friday as to whether they will be extended and what timeline might be involved. So while the virus isn't a threat to us just personally, but it also will have significant impact on the Irish economy. I mean, we've seen something of the order of 750,000 of people who have lost work during this period, and the government is likely to spend just shy of €4 billion over the next 12 weeks dealing with that situation. And predictions show that our economy is likely to shrink by just over 7%, which brings a very real threat of recession. There will also be potentially a significant deficit in the government's budget, and that's likely to put strain on us, on our businesses. So one of the ways that we need to support, I guess, the national effort and the government's guidance to flatten the curve is to practice social distancing, and a key element of that is working from home. For many of this is new territory, uncharted, and today we're going to discuss ways to embrace this new way of working. So how has COVID-19 changed the way we work? First of all, obviously it is having a decisive influence on where we work. We're moving from typically a structured office setting to working remotely, and predominantly for people finding somewhere to be able to engage with their work from home. Many places where people may not even have a desk or a setup that allows them to do that. It's also having an impact on when we work. In this new setting, we're having to adjust our normal working hours to accommodate our teams, to accommodate home needs, and to deal with customer or client requirements. Closure of schools means that people may have young children at home, and you may need to be working around those at the moment in terms of their schedules, their attention spans, their demands, and that could mean either working earlier in the morning or later in the evening and fitting around that, and possibly negotiating with your partner around how that works. And finally, it's changing how we work. In-person interaction isn't possible at the moment and for the foreseeable future, but we still need to collaborate and engage with each other and work as teams to get things done. And we now have to rely on technology to allow this collaboration, and some of the tools that people are starting to use include Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Skype, etc. So this is, taken all together, a very big change for all of us. And our new situation presents its own unique challenges, which we want to look at now in a little bit more detail. It's a challenging time for everyone. Adjusting to a new normal can be difficult, can be overwhelming, and people need guidance. If you're unfamiliar or have little previous experience of working remotely, this can seem particularly daunting. As seen from some of the quotes on the screen, working remotely is not a seamless experience for everyone. It's common to feel isolated, disconnected from your team, and there can be an added strain if you have responsibility for managing a team from afar. You're no longer able to just stop by and physically check in with them. It can be more difficult to monitor what work is being done, and it can put a strain on the kind of trust that's necessary for teams to work effectively and ensure that work and outcomes are delivered. If you're working from home and you also have children to look after, there can be additional pressure caring for them on top of completing your own work. And some businesses are still struggling with the basics, which is providing equipment for people to be able to work securely remotely, or ensuring that some of the processes that people need to follow in their organization can actually be performed electronically and without in-person interaction. All of these challenges are normal, and our experience is that many organizations are working through them. So today we aim to shed some light on a few of these challenges and help you and your team adjust to this new normal. As a firm in Deloitte, we've developed an integrated response to COVID-19 for our own people, and that's based on a principle of resilient leadership in a time of crisis. In our experience, resilient leaders look at three elements which form the basis of our own approach. Firstly, how will they respond to this challenge to manage continuity? Secondly, how will they recover from the current situation by learning and emerging from it stronger? And finally, how will they thrive by preparing for the next new normal, which I think we can assume will probably be something significantly different from what we left a number of weeks ago. A key priority leaders should pay attention to in this time is talent and strategy. And today we're going to spend some time talking about how leaders can address those talent and strategy topics with a specific focus on your people's well-being and effectiveness while they work remotely. So we'd like to hear from you at this point. Before I hand over to Andrea, I'd like your input on some of the challenges that you are currently facing with remote working. So you should see a poll on your screen at present. And if you could please take a minute to make your selections and use the poll function to answer the question. And really what we would like people to do is select the 3 key challenges that you are battling with at the moment. So I guess your most urgent and important challenges. And it'll be very interesting to see what the reflection from the group is. So I'll just give everyone another couple of seconds to make their selections. And we'll have a look at the results. So very interesting. Almost all of our options are featuring. The only one that doesn't is the process one, so that's interesting. And motivation, well-being, and the distractions of being in the home are coming out as the top choices. And very interesting as well to see that the lack of clarity in terms of people and team members when working remotely. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andrea, and our expectation is that we can certainly address or give you some thoughts and some insights on some of these challenges. And as I said, if at any point you have a question or a comment, please enter it into the Q&A. But now I'll hand over to Andrea.
Great, thanks Ian. That's interesting to see the responses to the poll, because that's certainly some of the elements that Elsie and I will be covering in the next sessions. So firstly, to talk about how to mobilize your team. So when mobilizing your team, it's absolutely essential to first get the basics right. We assume that on this call alone, we have businesses with different levels of maturity when it comes to remote working. Some of you may already have all the tools to make this work, while others may still be struggling with finding laptops for people to work on. Regardless of where you were before this crisis, make sure that you provide your teams with the right tools to work remotely. Something a lot of us take for granted is having a proper space to work. Some of your team may only have a small bedroom, or may be sharing their house with several housemates, all fighting for a place to work. Find out what your team's workspace situation is and how you can support them to make it more productive. Then support them by providing a computer or laptop to do their work on, secure access to work files. Working from home brings lots of security threats with it, so make sure you have the VPNs and security settings set up for remote working. They'll need an internet connection, be it Wi-Fi or the provision of a dongle, chats and collaboration apps to engage with team members, and video capability for meetings. Alongside these tools, your team need the right software to be able to work remotely. For example, MS Teams is an excellent virtual collaboration tool available. Zoom and Skype are good communication tools suitable for meetings, and the one we're using at the moment, On24, is an option for virtual conferences. The other tools we use daily, such as WhatsApp, can also be a valuable tool for connecting. It is, however, vital to ensure that everyone on your team actually has access to the necessary technology, and more importantly, knows how to use it. There will be some people who have never used this type of software before, so be patient. Once you have the basic tools and technology sorted, you can move on to the all-important topics of productivity, connection, and engagement. Setting expectations is absolutely critical. As this is the first time most of us are implementing remote working at this scale, There may be team members who are unsure of how it will work and what will be expected. A key element that inhibits productivity is the lack of clarity and fear. So act quickly to set clear expectations for your team and keep the conversation open to adjust to changes as they occur. As a leader, it's important to try to focus on outcomes, not on time. As long as you're receiving the outcomes you need, there's no need to put additional pressure on your team by watching the clock or asking for a play-by-play of what they're doing. This will avoid placing additional pressure on your employees while keeping a clear focus on the future. There's a six-step process in setting expectations for your team that you might want to follow. Firstly, it's important to define what is possible for your team members given their current working situation. Map out the usual work and see what can be done remotely and what not, and challenge your normal perspectives of what is possible. Set attainable targets with your team. Plan according to what realistically can be done, thinking about everyone's unique working situation, and ask for their input to get it right. Define the rules of engagement. Decide how often to communicate, to give updates, and when people should be available for teamwork. What are the non-negotiables? Assign responsibilities, so make sure that everyone is clear on what they should be delivering on a daily basis and check their understanding. Things tend to get lost in translation when we're working virtually. It's quite important to track progress in real time, so maybe see about using software to keep people updated on tasks. And lastly, to be able to measure success and review how you're doing. Remember to also celebrate your successes and always be prepared to adjust your plan. It's also important to bear in mind that as managers and leaders, you may have to adjust your own expectations for your employees. Everyone's working situation will be different. You know yourselves, people may be parents or carers and therefore may have other priorities at this time. Communicate with your team about their individual situations and try to just be flexible in how you expect employees to deliver. The same is true when managing customer expectations. Clear communication is essential. Communicate any restrictions or changes for customers and discuss how you'll meet their needs during this period. It could also be useful to perhaps send them a list of who to contact for what during this time. It's important that we remain connected through check-ins and meetings. Staying connected with your team is now more important than ever. Remote working can often be lonely and can lead to employees feeling isolated or disconnected from their colleagues. To combat these negative feelings, schedule regular check-ins and meetings with your team and use video conferencing wherever possible. You'll see here that we've given you a checklist and you could potentially use it to see if you have catered for all different check-in needs. You have to balance team and one-to-one check-ins. It's also important to balance between work-related check-ins and softer topics such as the general well-being of your team. You may not be able to get to your team every day, so assign a buddy to each of them and have them check in with each other to decrease the load. Lastly, it's important to remember to celebrate successes. When working remotely, weeks can feel long, and it's good to highlight what the team has achieved to keep them motivated. Furthermore, as in-person meetings have now been replaced by virtual meetings, it can be more challenging to attain the engagement you normally would in face-to-face meetings. When running virtual meetings, think about your audience. The smaller the better, as it gives people more opportunity to be heard and engage. Prepare for the meeting. Do a test run on the software, particularly if it's software you've not used previously. We've all had those glitches in conference calls before, so try to avoid that by being prepared. Make it as interactive as possible, so give everyone a chance to speak and have their opinion heard. This creates an inclusive environment. Also allow for interactive elements such as polls or even games during the meeting to keep people engaged. Collaboration. Collaborate and acknowledge different perspectives on topics. Use virtual whiteboards to get people to contribute. Be present. So switch on your video wherever possible. People tend to be more engaged when they're on video. One of the keys to success with staying connected with your team is to have face-to-face interaction as much as possible and fewer emails. I think we're all experiencing that email overload at this point. So try to maintain that human element wherever you can. So staying connected on a social level is also right up there with mobilizing teams. A lot of us rely on our work environment for social interaction. I know I certainly do. So it's important to maintain this even when working remotely. There are numerous virtual ways to keep connected with your colleagues on a social level. So for example, scheduling a 3 p.m. virtual coffee break with your colleagues and a catch-up about non-work related items. Have a virtual happy hour on a Friday evening to celebrate the end of the week. Set up a book club with your colleagues and discuss a book a week, or simply have a good news bulletin with any positive stories your team members may have. Some of our clients are even doing yoga together or setting fitness challenges. Here at Deloitte, we have a number of initiatives to ensure we maintain our social relationships during these difficult times. In my team, we have a daily stand-up every morning to check in with all team members. This call also helps to get everyone out of bed in the morning to start the day on the right foot. Some of them might arrive looking a little bit disheveled, but at least they're up and at it to start the day. We have a quarantine where managers invite a small number of their team members for a virtual cup of tea and a catch-up on how they're doing personally. Quarantinis are scheduled for Friday evenings, where we have virtual team drinks to celebrate the end of the week and wind down a bit. These are just small steps to ensure that we as a team stay in contact daily as we would have if we were in the office. So I'd like to go to our poll, and the question that we'd like to ask all of you is, in what way do you think the workplace will change as Ireland recovers from the current COVID-19 crisis? There's a couple of options there for you to select from, but if you could select up to 3 options so that we could have a look at what your views are. I might just give you a couple of moments to read through all of those and make your selection before we have a look at the results. Great, so those are coming through there now. So looks like definitely there's a lot of you thinking there'd be increase in flexibility in the workplace to allow people to work from home. Yep, and a lot more people probably asking for that as we move forward. New ways of working being established. Certainly I think this crisis has been a catalyst to kind of propel us forward into those new ways of working. Increase in automation. Very interesting. But there seems to be, there's a resounding agreement that things certainly will not be staying the same. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. So next up is Elsabe, and Elsabe will be talking to us about the physical and psychological well-being of working remotely.
Thanks, Andrea. So I work in the human capital team at Deloitte, and one of the key questions that we keep getting from our clients over the past few weeks is, how do I keep my team motivated and productive while working remotely? And Andrea certainly touched on a few of those things, whether it's setting the right expectations, keeping connected, or just providing them with the right tools to do that. But as a leader, you should be looking at softer elements as well. And that's where the psychological and physical well-being comes in. When we're looking at motivation and productivity, it's really critical to make sure that you keep your energy levels up and can have that motivation for the rest of the day. And that's where your mindset and physical well-being comes in. So what we're seeing then, and what we would recommend from our side, is one of the first things that happen when people are taken out of their structured work environment is they let go of healthy habits. Where you perhaps would have gone to the gym before or after work, or a colleague would grab you for a cup of coffee during the day, or even just grabbing a healthy fruit from the cafeteria or from your kitchen. These things are not there anymore when you work in your remote environment. At home, it's really easy to switch that fruit for something sweet out of your kitchen cupboard, or to just move from one screen to the other, from your laptop to the TV for a break. So really, there's quite a few unhealthy habits that sneak in. You now have the opportunity, with some commuting time that's been given back to you, to get outside, get some exercise, or to catch up on a few things that you really enjoy so that you can unwind. So what we suggest is add a few things to your to-do list that are actually healthy and will help you with your motivation for the rest of the day. How you can do that is to structure it into your normal working day. So what you'll see on this slide is kind of a typical working day, or hopefully. I think one of the key things that I've seen since working from home is it's really easy to skip over that commuting time, sleep in, and kind of just stumble out of bed a few minutes before your first call. And that's a really bad practice when it comes to healthy habits. It's now a key time to catch up on exercise, get outside. And a key thing that we've seen is if you dress for the occasion, you seem to be able to trick your mind into feeling more normal and adding structure to your day. So it's really important to actually get dressed and not be in your pajamas or your sweatpants for the whole day. It will add to your motivation. A key element that we've also seen is get a few things, critical things done early in the morning. If you schedule those tasks right from 9 a.m. onwards, and you can tick a few off, you will have motivation and productivity for the rest of the day because you have that sense of accomplishment. So that's a key tip that's really been working well for me. The middle part of this structure is also very important. As Andrea has mentioned, social interaction is key to our workday. Now we have to kind of build that into our days, whether it's a lunch with our family members or our housemates, or that 3 p.m. Coffee break with your team member. You need to put that into your diary to make sure you keep those habits going. And something that we've also seen is it's so difficult to now create that barrier between home and work life. You're basically in the same place all the time. So the important practice is to switch off your laptop, put it away, and move out of that working space to somewhere we can do something completely different. And here we're not talking about Netflix and chill. We're talking about do something interesting with your family, do something creative, really get away from that screen time. And it's also important to get to bed at a reasonable time. This is not the time to catch up and binge watch all the series that you've missed out on through your hard work in the year. Rather get to bed at a reasonable time, and you'll thank yourself for the productive day you'll have that follows. So the key for us really is to add back that structure to your day that you don't have while working remotely. The next element we want to look at is really the key challenge, I would think, for us at Deloitte, but for a lot of our clients as well. And that's healthy boundaries and distractions. We've already seen some of the comments coming through on our questions, but what about my kids? I've got young kids. It's so difficult to manage that. And we experience that in our team as well. The few things that we can advise you on is set working limits, create a space for you to work in so that you know and your family knows that's your dedicated workspace. Also look at dedicated start and end times that will add that structure to your day. It's also important to have these conversations with your family and with your housemates so that they understand when you will be available and when not. What we've seen work well, specifically with those who have children, is segment your day into workable chunks. So allocate 2 hours for you and 2 hours for your partner for work time, and you kind of shuffle around that. What that will allow is 4 hours of productive work for you and for your partner throughout the day, and you'll be surprised how much you can get done if you really just kind of put your head down for four hours and work. Studies have shown with businesses kind of all over Europe that shorter work weeks, shorter work days actually drives productivity more. So why not leverage on that to push you throughout this time when it's really difficult to focus with distractions? Another key element that we see with remote working is there's an influx of calls and video conferences. It's almost like your entire day just revolves around that, and you never really get to the work you have to do, which then ends up going into your evening time. So be disciplined around that. Create breaks in between, and perhaps stick to 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. One slot you do the work, and the other slot you do your calls. And that way, hopefully, you'll get to everything that you need to. But in essence, set the boundaries, communicate to your family, and also communicate it to your team. The last element that we want to discuss before we go into the questions and answers is time management. Although this is quite a familiar concept for all of us, it's a bit different when you're working remotely. And a few key tips that we can give you is, first of all, don't multitask. I think it's so easy to maybe put something on the TV in the background while you're working, getting your social media on your second screen at home, but that just distracts you from the work that you need to do. Rather create a reward mechanism where you use that to reward yourself after you've achieved something. And focus on the outcome that you have to achieve rather than watching the clock. With remote working, presenteeism is a real risk. And we don't want our employees simply watching the clock for the next break if they can just focus on their outcomes and reward themselves with a proper break afterwards. A key element that also helps a lot, and this is also a tip for those with kids, is find your productivity sweet spot. Track your tasks to see when are you the most productive, and make sure you get that slot, and that's the time that you do your work. And schedule the things that are more mundane, like calls and emails, for other times in your day, so that you at least know, I had that 2 hours of productive work. And then if all else fails, why not try something new? I tried the Pomodoro method last week. It's a productivity accelerator. And how it works is you plan your day in terms of outcomes, and then you set a stopwatch for 25 minutes where you work and just focus on that. You take a break for 5 minutes, you check what you've done, and you get started with the next 25 minutes. So what this does, it breaks your day up in manageable chunks. It gives you more brain breaks so that you can be refreshed. And you also become more focused because you know you only have that 25 minutes to focus. I found this is a really great tool to get started if you're not motivated, because the first 25 minutes is basically key. If you get that done, you're in that routine and you continue with the next 3 cycles before you take a proper break. So yes, that's from our side to share some of the tips that we've seen and it's worked well with Deloitte. Before we get into the actual questions, I just want to pose our last poll question. This is a short one. And we want to know, what is that key thing that's distracting you from work? We all know there's something, so we've just listed 4, but if you can choose the one that really speaks to you, and we can look at the results shortly. Just going to give you 5 more seconds to answer. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I must say this is definitely what we would have expected. I think the #1 distractor for Deloitte as well is increased calls due to remote working. It's such a difficult element to manage. I think what we've learned as a team is to be more disciplined in terms of what actually requires a call, and also to be more disciplined in terms of saying no and allowing yourself space to work. It's all about healthy boundaries. And again, the family and housemates, children in the house, housemates who's not working perhaps, really does become a big distraction. So yeah, I'm happy to see that we are all facing the same challenges, even though it's not easy to solve. Okay, so I see there's quite a few questions that's come through as we've gone through the presentation. So me and the panel will now see how many of them we can answer. Let me just get to them. Okay, so the first one that we've got here is, how do you deal with conflicts over staff working off-site versus on-site? This is quite a good one. It can be perceived that those working from home because of other commitments are getting preferential treatment. Okay, so panel, I hope you are back online. I'm going to field this one to Andrea.
Sure. I think I think some of those working at home would disagree. They'd rather come back to the office, to be honest. But I think that, you know, the way to kind of manage this is, are we looking at output? So exactly what LCB and I were talking about there is to manage not by time but by outputs. So even though people are working from home because they have other commitments, perhaps they're in a caring role, are they finding time around that role to still be producing the same amount of work as those that are in the office or are on site? And what does that look like? And I think it's around having open lines of communication. Why do people feel that those that are on site are disadvantaged, or those who are off site are getting preferential treatment? What are some of those kind of triggers, and how can you deal with them as a team or as an organization? And kind of, I think it's also around perception management. So that's where I would be looking to come in from as a leader of a team anyway.
Thanks, Andrea. And maybe just to add on that, Ian, you can go.
Sorry, LCB, go ahead.
Thanks. So maybe just from my side to add on that, I think this would be a key challenge when we go back to the new normal, or when we go back to normal after the crisis. I think with people expecting more flexibility maybe. So I think this is kind of a good practice run to see how do you deal with these conflicts and set clear expectations on an outcome level for your team, so that it's something that you can actually use going forward again. Ian, you're welcome to go ahead.
Thanks, LCB. Sorry for that. We're keen to jump in on the questions. Great questions coming in. I would just add on the conflicts and off-site versus on-site. I mean, I guess this is something that we've seen a number of organisations have been confronted with, and I suppose the key issue is safety. And certainly we've encountered some situations with organisations where people who are performing either essential tasks or ones that cannot be performed remotely are still required to be present in an office. And I guess the key thing is to ensure that whatever safety measures are required in terms of spacing, distancing, hygiene are being stringently followed, and really give people as much comfort as possible and as much support as possible that the environment is safe. So I think that's at the core of it. And I guess the other element around fairness or unfairness, it goes to the points that both you and Andre have made already. So I agree with the points you've made there. But I think the safety one is a core issue, and it's one that we have found being raised explicitly by employees with some other clients.
Great, thanks, Ian. Ian, I'm going to throw this one back at you. I've got another question here that I think you can give good insights into. So I'm on a management level in my company, and my employees are quite old-fashioned. We have the proper equipment and infrastructure to work remotely, but they are questioning what staff are doing, how they are doing it, and should pay cuts be implemented as the level of work can't be done at home as to that in the office. Any advice would be appreciated.
Okay, thanks, Elsie. So I think there's a number of points there. Obviously, from what has been called out in the question, this is quite a new situation and one that people are finding difficult to adjust to. And it sounds like trust, visibility, reassurance around work being done is a key issue. So hopefully, some of the things we've covered already can give some pointers in terms of how you can manage that. So to be sure about what people are doing, engage with them in the right way, communicate often and effectively, and have a level of, respect, but also understanding on both sides of the equation about what needs to be done and that it is actually happening. The other issues then around how much work can actually be performed in the current situation and what that means for the business overall. I guess, again, that's something that is a very common challenge and organizations are trying to grapple with that commercial question and what that means in terms of liquidity. My only advice would be to be open with people if it's something that's under consideration to at least communicate that. And if a decision is made in the organization, again, that is communicated in a fairly open way. And I think as long as people perceive that whatever measures are required in this fairly extraordinary situation we are all in, as long as they're applied fairly and transparently, then people can process what's happened and understand that in the context of the bigger picture, some certain measures may be necessary.
Absolutely, and I think it's also important to highlight how this will be addressed once we get back to the office, and to say that there might be new ways of working in any way. So it's a good time to get into that ways of working and to start considering perhaps we should start renewing how we are doing things. Next question here, and it's kind of, yeah, go for it.
I was just going to add, it just highlights again the importance of the kind of communication that we talked about throughout this session, and really focusing on communicating regularly. If people have things like that on their mind and they're sitting at home on their own or feeling disconnected, then that makes the situation more challenging for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then the next question, it's kind of a twofold. I'm going to combine two of them. So the one is, how do you say no to work? And how do you deal with around-the-clock emails, phone calls, deadlines, etc.? So I'm happy to give my input on this. So I think what we need to consider is a key risk for remote working, especially, and this is kind of for people who are new to it as well as people who's done it for a long time, is you're always on. And that's, again, where the healthy boundaries comes in. So first of all, you need to be really clear on the expectations from your team. So you would remember that Andrea mentioned the rules of engagement around expectations. So when do we expect people to be answering emails, phones, working on deadlines? Has it always kind of been the expectation that it's around the clock? If not, what happened so this expectation is now there? So that's the one thing. The second is, if that's not the expectation, somewhere there might be a lack of communication in setting the right expectations, and the communication around, I've got these boundaries and limitations to my work life, so I can actually only answer calls and be on until 6 or whatever that time might be, and for your team to be aware of that. So for me, this is a case of setting the right expectations, communicating it effectively to the team, and also setting the boundaries for yourself. I hope that answers that question. We've got quite a few also still coming through. This is quite an interesting one. How do you deal with staff morale when some colleagues are working and some are not, but all are getting paid? So Andrea and Ian, I don't know if you've got a few comments on that one.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think Sorry, Ian, go ahead.
I mean, it's a tricky situation, clearly, and I guess the watchword I would go back to again is communication, transparency, and again explain the rationale for why people are in specific situations. I guess the other point is around the fact that we know that government supports are being deployed to help people in specific situations. It could well be that that's part of the picture here. So again, I guess explaining that that's the case is important to people, and also you know, the ability that people have to carry out specific roles or tasks in the current situation is obviously in many cases circumscribed. So I think if there's a sense that there is concern around that, or that there's a feeling of resentment or a feeling that people are being treated differently, it's very good, very important to kind of surface that and have a conversation about it, understand what people are thinking, and just talk them through the rationale for different situations and why specific decisions have been made in the organisation. That would be my thinking, Andrea, but I'd let you add your thoughts.
Yeah, I tend to concur, and I mean, I do think it's quite a tricky situation, and it is around having open communication with those team members at this stage anyway, and seeing where we can flex.
Absolutely. And I think this next question also about flexibility. Would you discourage spreading the working week out over 6 to 7 days in order to achieve daily flexibility? I think this is really an interesting way and question, and it's certainly something to consider. I think from our side, flexibility is key in this time. As a leader or a manager of a team, this is absolutely what it calls for, is flexibility. Whether that flexibility looks like a 6 to 7 day of work to allow you to look at after your kids, etc., that's the key question. I think how I would approach this is to look at the specific situation of the team, what it is they need to achieve, and again, that the art of the possible, what is possible in terms of working remotely. So it may just be that they're not going to be able to get to all the work they need to, and one of the solutions that they may come to you with is, can I spread it out? And I wouldn't discourage you in terms of being flexible around that, because this is a temporary situation. I would caution you against doing that in one sense, that you can create burnout for that team member, and they need to then be incredibly disciplined in how they actually create breaks and time to rest within their lives as well. We don't want to be overloading team completely in this time, since it is a temporary arrangement.
Yeah, I think also having structure around that is also quite important. So if you are spreading your work over the 7 days or whatever to ensure you have the flexibility, you also need times when you are on and productive, and then times when you are able to step away and be completely off, so that you're not impacting all elements of your work life and home life balance.
Perfect. Okay. So there's still a lot of questions. Just a note, if we do not get to your questions in the session, we will answer them in a follow-up email as well, and you are welcome to reach out to your Deloitte contacts or to us for further questions. I think we can probably field one or two more. Let's just see.
There's a question there around there's a question there around how do you maintain the very best balance between micromanaging and autonomy. We know autonomy is important, but we also want to check in a lot. Any good examples of good balance? So I think something that works quite well with my team at the moment anyway, and it speaks to setting expectations, communication, autonomy, as opposed to micromanaging, is having a daily stand-up, or call it a daily check-in or a project check-in if it's not with the whole team, to hear to hear what the challenges people are facing are, what they're working on for the day, what their attention is going to be focused on, and what the kind of output that you could be expecting for that day might look like. So then you know, sorry, excuse me, you know what to expect. You don't need to micromanage. They've told you, had the autonomy to kind of tell you what they're going to be doing, when they'll be doing it by. And that check-in element, or that kind of managing element, would come in later on if you haven't received that output. So set the day right, start the day right, set those expectations, be clear on what they are, allow your team to be autonomous in bringing to you what they'll be doing, and if some management is required later on, then obviously you can step in from that perspective. So that seems to be working quite well with my team at the moment. I don't know if you have any other examples of these.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. We had this question from some of our other clients as well, especially people who are very task-focused. It's difficult to keep them going if you kind of always have to think of a task to give to them. So that's where the daily stand-up works really well, because you set expectations for the day and you can challenge them on that as well, to say, okay, but what else do you think you can do with the time that you have, and kind of get that initiative going as well. So I would say that's really a key enabler as well. I think, yeah, time-wise, I think we're going to wrap up with the Q&A at this point. As we said, we will definitely get back to you in terms of answering any of the unanswered questions. I'm just going to hand back to Ian to wrap up the sessions for us.
Thank you very much, Elsie, and thanks to you and to Andrea for sharing your insights and your suggestions with us all today. Before we close the session, I would like to invite all of you to the next webinar in our COVID-19 series from Deloitte on the 14th of April. We'll be hosting a webinar on what is really a vital talent and strategy topic, which is leadership, and specifically equipping leaders to adjust and prioritize the new behaviors that they need in this time. Some of them we possibly touched on today, but we will be spending much more time having a focused discussion on those. So that webinar will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. If you'd like to register, there will be a link for that in the follow-up email you'll receive from today's session. And just to say, as we've been asked a couple of times on the Q&A, that we will also be sharing the content from today, the slides, and there will also be a recording of today's session available, and that will be shared with you as part of that follow-up email. So in closing, I think we would just like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Understand that everyone is facing difficulties at the moment, and you know, our commitment is very much to be here to support you, to share our experience, and to help provide some of the tools and tips that can make life a bit better for your teams and your people. We will, as we said, follow up on any unanswered questions, but if you have, upon reflection, any questions after the event or things that spring to mind once you reflected on our discussion today, we'd be quite happy to have a discussion on those as well. So please feel free to contact us or to reach out to your usual Deloitte contact to see if we can help you with those. So I'd just like to say thank you very much again. I hope everyone has a safe and productive day, and I wish you all a very happy Easter as well. Thank you. Goodbye.